Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why customers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
He makes a steak?
What fresh hell?
Laughing in the face of motherhood.
Mind your mother, boy!
With Margaret Abels
and Amy Wilson.
Hard lesson, and didn't do it again.
A podcast that solves today's parenting dilemmas
so you don't have to.
Just go get a box and start killing raccoons. That's what we're doing today, you know?
Hey, everybody. Welcome to What Fresh Hell. This is Amy.
And this is Margaret. And Amy, this week we're talking about getting our kids to do.
I can't wait to find out because I am not good at this.
I'm not going to lie. It's going to be a bit of a journey here because I feel like this is a place where we can speak from our point of view, kind of far down the road. You about to launch your third and last.
Yes.
Me with 3 kids still at home who are teenagers, who basically think I'm the lamest person who's ever been born. How do we motivate our kids to do things, do their homework? We just did Getting Kids to Read, and we had a lot of good ideas about that. Lots of good help about it. This is what brought this episode to mind. Our garage in the winter becomes an episode of Hoarders. I mean, it really looks like, and this year we really upped the stakes we recycle cardboard. And because we're a family of 5 and we're at times over consumers, we have a lot of cardboard boxes. And at some point, and I will say this was unbeknownst to me, the system, instead of like opening a box, getting out the box cutter, breaking it down and putting it in the cardboard recycling, became throw the entire box in its original shape into the garage.
Wow.
We have a 2-bay garage, a 2-car garage. One of them kept my car, but then there's a clothesline in between on which we hang the tents that my husband and son use for camping. So it was creating a barrier to the other side of the garage. So I was I did not know this was going on. One day recently, I was pulling in and I accidentally hit the wrong button on the garage and it opened the unopened door. And it was like a horror movie. Cardboard boxes. It truly, have you seen Hoarders?
Oh, yes, I'm aware.
That's what it looked like. Cardboard boxes piled high to the sky. No room to walk. You couldn't enter the garage if you needed to. And then because I live in New York, 4 million leaves have blown under the door and are enmeshed with the cardboard boxes. And then because I live in New York, 800 different people are like, hey, can I keep this in your garage?
I dream of a garage. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm always like, we got a garage. Throw your stuff in it.
Yeah. It can get to this point. That's the problem with the garage. There's always a place to throw more stuff.
I mean, were there an entire family of raccoons living in there? Who could say? It was hoarder level disaster. One of the problems about living in New York is that no one wants to clean out the garage when it's 28 degrees outside because it's an outdoor activity that you then have to do for 5 hours. It's already unpleasant. And so it becomes kind of a spring cleaning activity. All this to say, it was time to clean out. It was time to face down the monster and clean out this garage. I realized that I have 3 teenagers who should, for sure, help with this activity, right? It should not be me and my husband fighting the rabid raccoons that are living in the boxes.
No.
The 5 of us should take this on together. And I went through a whole debate in my mind, like, am I going to pay them to do this? Am I going to just tell them to do this? When they do this with a terrible attitude, am I going to comment on that terrible attitude, or am I just going to accept the terrible attitude as part of the...
And they like, oh, I can't, like, this is so heavy, can't lift.
This box is... Meanwhile, they just like picked up golf clubs and their amps and speakers to play whatever. Yeah, but suddenly noodle arms and this one I love. Ew, this is gross. I'm like, right. actually gross to me as well.
The situation you created. Yeah.
A situation I created. And I thought,
No, they created. You weren't necessarily enforcing the breaking down boxes rule, but had it been followed.
you're absolutely correct. It's a situation that they helped create. I'm going to throw them under the bus with my husband's help. But could this have been stopped earlier by one of the people who were supposed to be in charge of the household, the adults? It could have, Amy. It could have been stopped earlier.
But there were tents there. You didn't know.
Now, was there some level of denial going on between me and the tents? Could I have parted the tents at any time and looked over there? Amy, I could have. We're all to blame. But you know what happens when we play the blame game? I lose. So we're just not going to do that. And it just made me think, like, how?
This is about how to getting our kids to do this, right?
Right. And I wasn't asking my kids to do it, but while I ate bonbons on the couch with my aperitif, I was asking them to join me in this task. And so that is the thing I want to talk about today. Like, how are we involving our kids in our household? How are we getting them to do stuff? We were recently with a relative who talked about growing up in the South in a very specific culture where parents were not questioned at all, ever, basically. Like, parents were in charge, children did what they said. This person at some point, after getting up and helping the dad at his business, which was hot, tiring, dirty work, at some point when this person was a teenager, had gone out and had some beers after the football game, and in the morning said to this parent, I will not be going to work today. I'm going to sleep in. I'm tired. At which point the parent said, you are going to work. Get up. The teen said, no, I'm not. And the parent picked this person out of bed, punched him in the face, and then he got dressed and went to work. So, like, that is an effective method of getting your kid to do what you want. Physical violence, right?
Right. Fear of their parent is no longer the strategy that it was. It's not really available to us.
It's also interesting in talking to this person that this happened one time in their life. And their idea was sort of like the rubber hit the road. This was not an abusive household. You could argue that that was an abusive moment. But it was interesting that this person's perspective was, I tried to fly off the course by becoming somebody who like drank all night and never did anything. My parent put me in my place one time, and now I've had a very successful life and outcome because I was raised that the right path is the right path. I do not come before you today with a podcast to argue for punching your child in the face, but I think the more we move away from fear-based and violent parenting, the more we can end up in a kind of swampy middle ground where I now know people who I would say have lost the script a little bit in the other direction, that the kid runs the house, never helps, never does anything, and sometimes is occasionally, in certain cases, physically violent with the parent. I think it's a giant spectrum, and I think it is harder. What I ended up arguing with this person is I think that parenting was effective for them, but that there was a way to parent closer to the middle of that spectrum, which would have also been effective. And they responded by saying, I agree. I, the person involved in the story, the punchee in the story, said, I have never physically touched any of my children in anger or violence. And that the parent, who ended up being like a very loving parent who was involved in their life until that parent's death, would often remark in their strong Southern accent, you know, he never touched those kids too. He never even spanked them. That parent lived in complete wonder that you could have a successful outcome with a kid who was loving, loyal, helpful, all the things you want a kid to be. This person, the punchee in the story is, I would say, a very remarkable person who's lived a very remarkable life and has very strong, loving relationships and all sorts of stuff. His outcome was good. His kids' outcomes have been good in the same way. But his father, I keep saying parent, obviously it was the father, his father lived his whole life in wonder that his son's children were obedient without ever getting hit.
I do think when you grow up in a sort of or else way,
Yes.
which we were later than that sort of parenting, which I'm happy about, but there was a sort of implicit or else, like, I couldn't not rake the leaves when my dad said rake the leaves. I couldn't do a bad job of it on purpose and complain until he let me off the hook. Like that was just not an option. And so I think it is confusing to us then when our kids do that. It's like, wait, you're not supposed to do that. I'm telling you to do it. We don't really know what to do because we didn't give ourselves that option.
I think we made the right choice to not have a fear-based relationship with my kids. And I do feel that sometimes when I'm driving around with my kids, and we do have a very connected relationship, even when I was driving around with one of my kids yesterday. And in the course of a mile, they basically corrected me 4 times. You pronounced that wrong. That's not that person's name. That's not how this works. And I sort of went back with, wow, I mean, it must be exhausting for you having to correct everything I do. And they kind of got in on the joke, and we ended up having a very funny conversation with it in a way that I was like, this is good. This is emotionally healthy. This is us kind of working through this problem in a fun way without me being like, you shut your mouth and you won't ever speak to me that way. You understand what I'm saying. You acknowledge that, like, in letting go of some of the authoritarianism of our previous generations, which back in the day was like, you work at the farm, I'm going to beat you if you don't put the hay in the piles fast enough. We're not longing for those days, but do we have to sacrifice kids who obey and listen and help around the house if we want to give up the authority over them?
How do you motivate them to participate in things that they don't feel like doing when you don't feel like doing them either? And all that's off the table. I think it's a really good question.
And God knows there are books written about how mothers are ruining the world by being too permissive these days. I don't believe in any of that, but I do think that this push and pull between being the parent and being the authority, I believe in my bones, and you can disagree with me, but I do believe that children need structure and guidance and walls. That kids need to understand there are lines they cannot cross.
Yeah, they do.
They feel safer when they are inside of a container. And you have to be that container, and you have to provide those walls for your children, because children who have no sense of what the rules are, I think that's emotionally damaging for kids.
I mean, the world will show them eventually, right? But you don't want them to have the consequences of the law being the walls when you just should have said no to them more often.
Yeah. And so I think we're going to have a tricky, sticky conversation about this today, about how we've approached it through the years, what has worked and not worked. We can talk about some studies and some writing on these topics that we've used as guidance. But I think that what we're fundamentally talking about is scales that we're constantly trying to balance, or sometimes you say dials, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need to be at the dials making small or big adjustments sometimes. And my moment with the garage was a little bit of, do I have the authority to tell my kids to get their butts down here and help clean the garage for 5 hours? And at the end of the day, I did. And some of them did it helpfully. And some of them did as little as humanly possible, thinking that I wasn't noticing. And some of them did it pretty robustly. And at the end, I sort of couched it in, when spring is here, we have a basketball net outside the garage. We could even put like a game set up in here. We could put a couch in here. You could have your friends over on Friday nights and you guys could hang out. But we can't do that with a family of rabid raccoons laying in this side of the garage that is so scary.
I thought you were going to say they were laying eggs. I'm glad they weren't laying.
Well, and to be fair, there was not actually a family of rabid raccoons, but there could have been. I think the kid who had the most buy-in to that story helped the most.
There you go. Not to jump to conclusions, but there you go.
So that was part of it. But now I've set up the problem, Amy. You're with me on the problem. I've got your full buy-in.
Full buy-in.
All right, let's come back and we'll start to talk about some of the solutions we found. Amy, let me tell you about a magical place that is so exactly designed to be enclosed space, year-round fun for the whole family that I bet you already know what I'm going to say before I even say the name. Let's say it together on 3. 1, 2, 3. Great Wolf Lodge. You got it, Amy.
My kids loved Great Wolf Lodge when we went. You probably already know that it has a huge indoor water park with a wave pool, lazy river, a bunch of massive water slides. But then your pack can hit the other attractions because wait, there's more.
Great Wolf Lodge has adventure-packed attractions like Magi Quest, a live-action game kids can play throughout the lodge, plus the Northern Lights Arcade. Spent some quality time there, so your kid who loves the lazy river and your kid who loves fantasy games will both have a great time.
Great Wolf Lodge also offers great dining options and complimentary daily events like nightly dance parties, all under one roof. Unpack the car once and you're settled in to have fun. And with 22 lodges across the country, you're always a short drive away from adventure.
We've both had such great times at Great Wolf Lodge, so bring your pack together at a lodge near you. Learn more at greatwolf.com and strengthen the pack.
Well, I'm coming in hot to say it is worth taking care of your skin. It's worth finding the right products to keep your skin smooth and hydrated. Let me tell you, I have tried many products, and time after time, I come back to Osea.
Amy, same. Osea just sent us their anti-aging body balm to try. It combines the lasting hydration of a lotion with the firming power of a serum, leaving my skin smoother, firmer, and beautifully supple.
Osea's body balm is clinically tested and designed to deliver visible results you can see and feel. Since using this product, I really have noticed firmer and smoother skin, backs of my hands, knees, elbows. It really helps.
Get a spring-worthy glow with clean, clinically tested skincare from Osea. And right now we have a special discount just for our listeners.
Get 10% off your first order site-wide with code FRESH at OseaMalibu.com.
That's 10% off your first order site-wide with code FRESH at OSEAMalibu.com.
Hey there, I'm Kendra Adachi, and my show, The Lazy Genius Podcast, helps you be a genius about the things that matter and lazy about the things that don't, and you get to decide what matters. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to give you a new way to see. Episodes of the Lazy Genius Podcast are full of compassionate time management tips and permission slips to do what makes sense for you. New episodes drop every Monday. Follow and listen to the Lazy Genius Podcast on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
So one of the pieces of writing and the theories that has come out about this is the baby hunter-gatherer style, right? Michaeline Duclef, Hunt-Gather Parent. Huge, phenomenal book. We had her on the podcast. We were like, this is so eye-opening. And is the idea that in ancient times and throughout times, children have been part of the fabric of the work that happens in the family. And that as modern people, we have gotten away from that. And the example that she uses that always sticks with me is we now buy a play kitchen for the kids to play upstairs while we cook in the kitchen because cooking is dangerous. It's totally fine. My kids have a play kitchen. All houses I've been to have a play kitchen. It's fine. But it's worth noting that bringing your kid into the actual kitchen to help them. I have a kid who's gotten into cooking, and I was sitting with this child yesterday. They're now much older, and they were chopping parsley and garlic and making a steak and chopping parsley and garlic and heating up the pan and then butter. And they made a really impressive steak. And I thought, that's because I don't really like to cook and I made them do a lot of cooking. Like, that's a win, I think, that this kid is going to go out now into the world having some pretty solid cooking skills. And at some point, he was trying to eat the steak and still cutting it with the gigantic chef's knife, like the serial killer knife, you know? And I was like, you should switch to a smaller knife now that you're eating it. And every part of my body was like, don't say anything, don't say anything. But I was actually worried he was going to stab himself.
But the Michaeline Duclef, the part about that I wanted to underline is that she makes the point in the book, all kids want to participate. Like a 3-year-old would love to help you clean the garage. Come on, we're going to come clean the garage with mommy. And okay. And they're really into it, but they're underfoot and there might be a raccoon. And so you shoo them away when they want to participate. And then all of a sudden when they're 8 or 10, they're old enough to help and they don't want to participate. But where we're getting it wrong is we aren't encouraging and including while they're still bought in.
From the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think that is useful information without being an answer for every household and an answer for everybody.
Right.
I also think and remember that when I had young children, I often just cleaned the house myself after they went to bed because I could not deal with it was a whole activity to organize. But I tried, and looking back and listening to Michaeline, I thought, that should have just been half the playtime is cleaning up from play. That's how they do it in a preschool. That would have been a better idea.
Mm-hmm.
Darcia Navarez, who is a psychology professor at the University of Notre Dame, has written on this topic, saying the way we raise our children today in this country is increasingly depriving them of the practices that lead to well-being and moral sense. She emphasizes things like having multiple adult caregivers, which is just something we've lost societally at this point. You don't live in a multi-generational household. Children tend to have one caregiver who is their be-all and end-all, which has some significant downsides. But I also recognize you may not live next to grandma, or your mother-in-law really may be annoying and you don't want her around. Like, we haven't done this because we're terrible people, I guess is what I'm trying to push back on. Things like free play, which we've talked about. Kids don't spend a lot of time like in the woods building a fort. I mean, how many hours did you spend outside of your house just building stuff with all the kids in the neighborhood?
I mean, I was mostly like Barbies in the backyard, but speaking of adult caregivers, it occurred to me, like if Mrs. Krupski told me to clean up or told me to like come help me bring the groceries in from the car, she was somebody else's mom, but any adult, are there downsides to that? I suppose that there are, but I definitely see that in kids and I'm like, wow, like if an adult told me to do something,
You do it.
I immediately participated.
And the adult had no qualms in telling you to do something.
No, or get down from there or, that sort of all adults were in charge of all kids in a neighborhood way.
It's funny because I have a New York life and a Texas life because my husband's from Texas and we spent a lot of time there. And I definitely noticed that parents in the South, in Texas specifically, because that's where we spend our time, are much more likely to discipline other people's kids than here where I live. And I have to say, it really annoys me when they do it. But it's interesting. It's just, I think culturally, like it is something that white, educated Northeastern people have kind of carved out of their lives. And I definitely see other cultures, even within our country, where I'm like, oh, that's very notable that if I'm yelling at my kid in Texas, an old man will walk by and be like, mind your mother, boy. And I'm like, oh, what? Like, don't tell me what to do. I'm not saying it's all upside, but it's the community we've lost, and we understand that.
Yeah.
And then naturally including kids in care tasks. So this is not the play kitchen, the kitchen, not the let's play, let's clean out the garage. I think that there's a lot of useful takeaways, but I also think there's some downsides, which include realities. I don't like it when we don't deal in reality. Like, I'm all for not having a cell phone if you can do it. That's not my reality. I need my kids to have a cell phone. Could they have an only button phone? I suppose they could. But all three of my kids have smartphones. And I try to figure out parameters around it, but I don't love solutions that are like, let's go back to a time where smartphones were not part of our kids' lives.
Yeah, to create that village yourself is impossible. But then it's like, but now what? That's where we're stuck. Like, why can't I get my kids to help me clean the garage? That's what we do. We're a family. We do stuff, but we've kind of taken away this approach and that approach. And then we're just left a little confused. Like, but now what?
I think the hunter-gatherer paradigm results in more labor for girls than boys. And that is something that I really notice in my own household. The person who's like, you look so tired. I could help with dinner tonight is my daughter.
The more we expect kids to help, the more the girls in our family will be helping. Despite our best intentions and awareness of this, it is going to be, if the kids are working more, the girls are working more than more.
I'm not going to get into gender theory because I don't understand it. But what I see is kids help around the house in these international communities. When I look at it, it's girls who are helping around the house. And I don't know that that's a household that's appealing to me. I'm just here trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But I do notice that the person who most offers domestic labor in my house is my female child. Worth noting.
This stuff runs deep. Although, you know what? Let me say one point of the other thing. When my kids were little, when my two boys were little, and my husband had to go do something annoying like clean the garage or rake leaves, he would often call it man work. And he'd say, like, come on, boys. This is at that Michaeline Duclef age where, like, they're into it. He's like, come on, finish your breakfast. It's time for some man work. And then if it was, like, something that, like, daddy was doing and it was outside and it involved, like, changing a tire or whatever, right? They were into it. They were so in. And so we were leaning into gender roles in order to encourage cooperation. But yeah, those gender roles exist.
Yeah. And I think they can be useful or not useful.
Mm-hmm.
So I was trying to think about my garage and how to start this journey. And the biggest thing I think is that it's something that sometimes I've had very operational in my house, and sometimes I have not had very operational in my house, where I'm like, I cannot deal with these teens. I'm not going to ask them to do anything because I cannot stand to fight for 40 minutes about it. But I think being very clear yourself on like, what could you use help with? What could your kids help more with? What do we want our kids to do? I think sometimes I look at other families and it's like, oh, our whole family, the kids raked all the leaves and put them in bags. Well, I don't do that. I would think, oh, my kids would never do that. And I know that people look at my family and think,
He makes a steak.
my kids are good at like holding doors for other people. Oh, that's so great. My kids would never do that. We go out a lot. Oh, your kids are so calm and good flying in on a restaurant. Yeah, because they've had a lot of experience because we travel all the time because our family's spread out. Don't compare yourself to other families, but like, what would it look like ideally for you to have kids who helped more around the house?
What do you need help with, right? Get clear about that.
This is a step that we often skip, right? Like, it's me versus the kids. My kids are lazy. Other people's kids are good. And my kids don't help. And just starting from the premise of like, what do I want help with? Now I'm going to lay a little Dr. Deborah Gilboa on you, Amy. Get the behavior you want without being the parent you hate.
That's the crux of it.
This is our thesis, right? So let's start with learning to contribute to the needs of the family as a child produces better results for adults. People who understand their role as part of a system are better employees, friends, and partners later on in life. So this is worthwhile work to undertake.
Absolutely. Exactly.
When we don't actually expect our children to follow through on jobs for whatever reason, we are conveying that we don't think they are capable of doing more than the minimum. We're kind of taking the walls down for them and saying,
It's fine. I'll do it. I'll finish it for you.
and I'll do it, we think sometimes conveys, look at how nice I'm being. But it can also convey, I don't trust you to do it. I don't think you're good enough to do it. I don't think you'll do it the right way. I think it's always worth starting on like, this is worthwhile to do because it is faster to clean the garage yourself. And nobody would complain about the music that I'm playing and that it makes me an unk.
Right.
But it's better for us to do it as a family.
Well, that's just it. And then this starts when they're 3. Like, it would be much more of a hassle to try to get this done with small kids underfoot. It's more of a hassle, which is why we don't do it. And then it turns into they're 13 and 14 and they're complaining and still more of a hassle. And somehow they haven't learned to participate.
Yeah. She argues eventually our children will leave home and not know how to feed themselves and maintain a clean, pleasant environment. I absolutely think this is wrong. I went to college having no idea how to do laundry. And the first day I did laundry, I literally had to get somebody to explain. My mother did the laundry for us. It was one of those things. It was in the basement. That was like mom's land. You didn't go in. And I think it's because she cared about her clothes and she didn't want us messing them up.
She didn't want to do it again. Right. She didn't want all the pink clothes to deal with. Yeah.
The first week of college, I had borrowed a shirt from someone. I was like, can you show me how to do laundry? I shoved everything in there. And she said, you have to separate the darks from the lights. I think this is actually becoming less true because clothes are so synthetic now that they don't tend to have this problem as much as they used to. But otherwise, the dark colors bleed onto the light color. But she explained it to me. And she was also quite mad because I had put a white shirt of hers that I'd borrowed in there. And that's how I learned to do laundry. And I basically never forgot it. I learned in 5 minutes. I think there's plenty of stuff as we are both launching kids into the world that we feel a little bit like, did we tell them to put the cap on the steamer? It will burn them. Like, they'll figure it out. You don't have to make sure they know how to do every task, but you don't want them to be like, where's the person who comes and picks up my laundry?
Right. They're going to learn fast. In one of my kids' cases, you go for parents' weekend and you find out my kid's room was full of fruit flies. It was such a mystery to this kid. They hadn't taken the garbage out in their first 6 weeks of school. Hard lesson, and didn't do it again.
Right. And you would never in a million years be like, if you don't take the garbage out, it's going to smell. But they might end up quite mystified. I mean, I've told the story before that I just kept writing checks the first year that I was in college because I thought it was like a credit card. You could keep writing checks and then your balance was negative $800. And then you would eventually put the money back in. I had every intention of paying it back. I wasn't stealing the stuff. And then I learned that that was a crime called check kiting that I could be indicted for. And I was like, wow, okay. Kids, you can't teach them everything, but you should be including them in as much as possible. If you take them to the bank, You're like, this is how a check works, And by the way, I'm so old that when was the last time anyone wrote a check? I couldn't find a check in my house at gunpoint, but
I think it's just that you don't need to be like, and you need to do this stuff because then your kids will never learn how to do it. Like, take that off. They should help you clean the garage because they should help you clean the garage.
assigning appropriate tasks and not calling them chores, which is very important in our house. I have a very smell-sensitive kid who I believe cannot do the litter box without throwing up. That kid is not assigned to the litter box. It's not a rotating system. The kids who are more involved with the cat do the food in the litter box. I also am extremely sensitive to smells. I do not get near the cat food or the litter box. If everyone else on earth died, my cats would die because I'm not going to feed them or clean their litter box. So the people who are less sensitive to that do that chore, but the kid who has that sensitivity does other things.
Right. They don't do nothing because that's so important to them. They make it up. They make it up to everybody in other ways.
Consistency with chores and maybe not calling them chores. This is part of how we operate in the house. It's not like you have a chore.
Right.
But I think there's something at the heart of this that is much more than sticker charts and like popsicles in different chore areas. And we're going to come right back and I'm going to tell you all about it, Amy. And now, types of kids at chore time.
From the What Fresh Hell podcast.
The Gold Star Kid will help with chores regularly, but will also demand constant reassurance that they are, in fact, the best counter wiper you have ever seen.
The overestimator likes to say, "Do I have to do everything around here?" whenever he is asked to pitch in. For the record, he does approximately 2,745th of everything around here.
The Sucker will double her work efforts if you tell her that her sister is a faster carpet sweeper.
The Snail would love to help you match up all the socks as long as you are willing for that task to take 3 hours.
The Fakers claim to be busy upstairs cleaning their room whenever you ask them to go play outside.
The Gamer will work in exchange for the Wi-Fi password.
The Grudge Holder still remembers that time 3 years ago when their brother got out of chores because he said he was sick, but knows he was totally faking it.
The Fatalist shrieks, "I just made the bed yesterday. Is this all there is? Just repeating chores every day forever? Welcome to my life, kid."
The Roomba, not technically a child, but the only member of your house who does chores without complaining.
This has been Types of Kids at Chore Time.
From the What Fresh Hell podcast. So I've talked before about Frank Bruni's piece, which we're going to link in this episode and you should read. And it's about, they have a dilemma where his father, who's what's called on the East Coast a snowbird, who spends the winter in Atlanta and the summers in New York, makes that drive. But his father is 79 years old and his wife has either passed away or can't make the trip. I can't remember. His wife isn't going with them. And so his adult children are wondering out loud, how are we going to do this? Can someone take time off work? We're all very busy. And at a certain point, the 18-year-old daughter overhears this. She's finishing high school. She's like done with all her requirements. She's like, I'll go. I got nothing else to do. And so now this 18-year-old and this 80-year-old are driving together. She's taking over this task. And Frank Bruni, his writing just lights me up. He's such a great writer. But in the piece, he says, his father says to him, "My firstborn granddaughter, come all this way to drive me. Can you believe it?" "I can," says Frank Bruni, because he set this up to happen. Leslie, who's the granddaughter, is the return on an investment that he made across many decades with so much of his time and so much of his heart. And I do think that getting away from chores and getting under that, you are teaching your children how to live their lives by how you live your life. The ability that I now have to say to my children, and I said it to my children at the time, like, my mom is dying and I need to be there for my mom. You need to step up and help around the house, and you need to not give me a hard time because I come in first this month because I'm losing my mom. And it's one of the hardest things I'm going to go through. And you guys have a role in helping me in that. To me, like, that's the work of chores. That's the work of, like, it's connection, but they have to see you doing that work too. You know, they have to see you helping your parents. And this is the thing that I want to get at that's underneath, like, whether or not I can yell at my kids enough to get them to clean the garage.
I have two responses to this story, which I really like, this Frank Bruni story. The first is I think that there is a tendency these days, like my parents would definitely have sent me at 18 to bring somebody who needed. Would I've offered to go? I'd like to think so, but I definitely would have done it. But today's 18-year-olds are teeny tiny babies who couldn't possibly do something like that. Drive a Cadillac on a highway, like the interstate, they barely have their permit.
Right. You have to read the article because he paints such a funny picture because he's such a talented writer. It's like this giant Oldsmobile, Cadillac, whatever.
There just was capability presumed. There was fear and there was also extreme capability. I got myself back and forth from college. Like, I don't even know how I did it, planes, trains, and automobiles, because otherwise I wasn't going to get home. You just figured this stuff out. And now, of course, I'm already thinking about my kid. Like, what about Thanksgiving? And should we get a plane ticket? I just think we do sort of oversee our kids' lives in little ways. And then we presume they wouldn't be capable of a large gesture like this. And then my other thought is that when you were saying this about your kids and when my dad was dying, I had a similar conversation with my kids. And then another time I really kind of needed to, like, remember how I said that? Like, that's still happening. We're still there. I'm still in that season. But then how do you walk that back? Maybe once they've learned that, once they've seen a parent really need support, like not just pretend I need your help with the garage, but like really need support, maybe that trickles down. Or is it something we have to figure out how to kind of walk back? Like, you don't have to be in dire straits for them to help you with the garage.
It's the scales, I think. And I talked to Janelle Hanchett about this on an episode long ago. And she said, you have to be careful to hand kids things that are not too heavy for them to carry. And this is the scales. Like, I don't think you can live your life in the space of like, I'm needy and you need to do everything for me. But I think if we skip telling kids that they can and will face hard things, we just have to keep rebalancing these scales. And I think that this is something you can really go back to one on. And so the end of my garage story is that I kind of sat the kids down and I said, listen, this is a space we all want to use. One of the kids really wants to use it as like a clubhousey space, but this is a space we all use. We all made this mess and we're all going to clean it together. Within that, because my husband stopped me from being crazy, he said to me, you have to let them do it however they do it. So one of them did it with what you would call a boo-boo face the whole time. And normally I would stop them and be like, get that boo-boo face off your face, because I'm not going to say, I'm not dead. I didn't do it. I let them do the whole thing with a boo-boo face. And one of them kind of did the very least. And then at the dinner table that night, I said, that was really hard. Here's like a big chicken parm dinner that I made for everybody. We did it. Here's what I noticed. And I kind of pointed out, like, listen, of course, the kid who wanted it the most did the most and helped the most and had the best attitude. The kids who wanted to do it the least helped. Like, this is what I saw. And I'm just going to reflect it back to you and do with it what you want, that information. It's not like you are a bad kid because you had a boo-boo face. And it's also fair that one kid wanted it and was enthusiastic about it. But I think being vocal about what our needs and wants are, and then being vocal about, and sometimes I'm the person with the boo-boo face, you know? And I'm like, listen, I screamed through that whole dinner because I was hot and I cooked all day and I felt like no one was appreciating it. And I did not need to be that reactive to what could have been a pleasant family dinner if I had calmed down for 5 seconds. Sometimes it's my job.
It reminds me a little bit of how do we get our kids to like to read? And we kind of came down on like, we can't make them like to read. We can introduce that reading is something we do in this house. And this is the same thing. We can have a house in which you don't have to like cleaning the garage, but we do it once a year around this time of year and block out your Saturday because it's going to take as long as it takes.
Here's Reem Rauda writing for CNBC. Children thrive when they feel respected, emotionally safe, and involved in the process. So she talks about shifting language, which I think is like a specificity that's not to this conversation. But instead of treating defiance or, lack of wanting to participate as something we squash, we begin to see it as a signal, a call for connection, clarity, or emotional support. And this can get into a little bit of like the tweet area of, before we clean the garage, Amy, I want to know, how do you feel about cleaning the garage? Like, no. Just go get a box and start killing raccoons. That's what we're doing today, you know? But she says, when we respond with empathy and leadership rather than control and criticism, we reduce power struggles and raise children who trust us, regulate themselves more easily, and grow into emotionally resilient adults. Easier said than done.
Right.
But I think that for this conversation, I wanted to think about the Frank Bruni of it all, resetting for myself that the importance is the value of helping to clean the garage versus the demand to help clean the garage. And I'm not going to punch my kids in the face to get them to do stuff, but I am going to invite and coerce their participation as meaningful members of the household.
I think it makes sense. I'm thinking about the emotional intelligence conversation that we had recently, and it's being aware of their emotions. Like being a leader, the emotional intelligence people would argue is not about making sure everybody feels the same way. It's about being aware of how people feel and being able to respond to that calmly. And I think if we pull into it, I shouldn't have to ask you twice. Like, wait, I shouldn't have to ask you at all. And getting mad about that they're not just listening. Believe me, I share that frustration.
And by the way, I do that 10 times a week. I shouldn't have to put up with your stink face when I ask you to take the garbage out when I do it every day without being asked.
And you're right. But what if the leadership comes without the control of how they feel about participating in the household?
For me, that's the lesson. For other people, it may be a different lesson. I think what you just said is exactly what my husband is constantly trying to teach me. If they do it, you don't also get to control how they do it. That's my journey, right? But for somebody else, it might be, I feel like I've lost the respect of my kids and now they won't listen to me. It's just a back to one. Like this weekend, maybe we're going to sit down and get some lemonade and be like, wow, it's beautiful in New York. It's our first sunny days. Like, let's go sit outside. And I want to have a chat and say, so I noticed lately that I'm doing everything around here and it's making me really mad. And I think I need more help. And like, is there a way that I'm approaching doing stuff that is turning you off? Like, how can we all get on the same side of the net and solve the fact that we have a hoarder's garage?
And find your blind spots, right? Like, oh, my 16-year-old daughter can't use the snowblower. That's for boys, right? Or that's for grown-ups. And like,
girls don't touch garbage in my house, Amy. Sorry, we don't do it.
Right.
I'm like, no gender roles until it's time for cats and garbage, because that's not girls' work. That's boys' work.
Or the weird bug in the shower. Right. But kids want independence. Kids want us to trust them. And moving a little bit more towards the like, yeah, I'll send my 18-year-old to drive your giant Oldsmobile up the highway, right? That we need to open up our minds to the freedom and the self-actualization that they kind of yearn for. There might be places that we're shutting that down and presuming they can't or won't or shouldn't do it, and then they have to do the boring part instead.
Yeah, and there's something interesting in what you said, which is different than what the story is. I'll send my 18-year-old. The point of his article is that the 18-year-old volunteered to go. And that's, I think, like where we want to get to. And I don't mean to say that like every time it's time to load the dishwasher, you have to sit down with lemonade outside and be like, let's talk about why we load the dishwasher. You want to get to the point where this is the natural state of your household that you can then refer to. And like, hey, I understand that going to visit this sick relative in a place that smells weird is not your idea of a good Saturday. But we do it because we're family and we try to show up for each other. And that it doesn't mean you're going to have 3 kids who are like always visit you in your gross nursing home when it's your turn. But it's really not about chore charts. It's about going back to one every time and being like, is the overall message of our house one that we work together to take care of each other? And I've lost it so many times. And the overall message of our house is there's an insane dictator lady who shrieks at us all the time. And that's how we get stuff done. But this garage thing made me think like it's time for me and my family to go back to one a little bit and say, hey, I need more help. You guys are teenagers. You should be helping me more.
Right. At some point, what you want is for somebody besides you to be the one like, oh my gosh, we got to clean this garage out. These boxes have to be broken down. You don't want it to be you and you don't want to be yelling at them to do it.
I mean, you're living in a fantasy land, but I love it. Yes, I would love that was someday the outcome. But even just to be able to say like, hey guys, it's spring and we still have Christmas ornaments under the stairs. Like, let's just take 3 hours this weekend and the 5 of us can do it in 20 minutes.
All right, let us know how it goes.
We're going to keep balancing these scales all the time in my household, and I'm sure your household, but I like thinking about it out loud with you and being like, yeah, this is worthwhile work.
Have you signed up for our newsletter? There's a link in the show notes for this episode. You can also go to whatfreshhellpodcast.com and click the link in the sidebar to sign up. Once a month, we send you follow-ups on our favorite episodes, what our listeners have responded, and things we talk about in the episode we actually get around to for the newsletter. Like this month's newsletter I gave a list of the 3 books that I leave out around the house that my kids really laugh at and enjoy that has gotten them to read like a little more. You got to get our newsletter to see what that's about. So sign up.
Got to get the newsletter, folks. Sign up. And with that, thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you to Osea for sponsoring our podcast. Get a spring-worthy glow with clean, clinically tested skincare from Osea. Right now, we have a special discount just for our listeners. Get 10% off your first order site-wide with code FRESH at OseaMalibu.com.